what was the biggest shift in your mindset after leaving Islam? And when I first saw that, I didn't have an answer right away. Then the next day, and this is 24 hours of thinking, unconsciously sort of, right? I was remembering all the things I had already done. And there's three big, first, the most recent, the two helping episodes that I did, helping people in this mini-series about how to de-indoctrinate. Both of them had issues that the underpinning ideas made us talk about punishment. Mm-hmm. One of them was, he talked about nihilism, and after some talking, he said, I want cosmic justice, but I don't believe in cosmic justice. That's a conflict. And that's related to punishment. It came up, he wants people that do crimes on Earth and then don't get punished on Earth. They need to be punished after Earth. And then the other one was somebody who presented with, I feel like a sinner, feelings of guilt, shame. And that's what punishment is for, is to instill shame. Shame is a type of self-punishment. And then more generally, and this is older, I started this nonprofit back in April, and the flag of the organization is to rid the world of one of the most aggressive forms of punishment, to kill someone for having a different opinion of you or for changing your mind about your religion. And then now personally, and it's going to come up in this here. So I guess personally, I guess I'll just wait. It's going to come up. So let's just start talking here. Punishment in all its forms is evil. I say forms because all the other forms, a lot of people don't even see them as punishment yet. Like the concept of shame, I'm sure there's lots of people that don't connect that with punishment. People want punishment because they want obedience. So what I mean by obedience here is, like, if I follow somebody else's ideas and I don't even agree with them, that's obedience. Now, if you tell me to do something and I like the idea and then I do it, that's not obedience, even though I did the thing. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, I was also going to add, what about retribution?
Revenge?
Yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to what's considered crimes against the entire society, where the society goes out and tries to punish people, not simply talking about punishment as a deterrent to ensure that people are not actually committing something that violates.
Yeah, so you're talking about eye for an eye.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really old concept. It's older than any religions, let's be clear. And I don't agree with it. One way I'll talk about it is, a lot of times that you see people doing revenge, they're doing revenge about something in reply to something that they were confused about. Okay? And actually a really weird scenario to understand, and I keep having to bring this one up. Imagine two 4 or 5 year olds, and this is very common in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world. If let's say they're horsing around, they're playing kind of rough, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then one of them accidentally hits the other one. And then the other one is crying now. It's an accident, okay? Now the second person, now they're crying. Let's suppose they saw it as intentional. And if they have the idea of eye for an eye or revenge, retribution, they might go do the same thing back to the first one. But if it was an accident, now what the hell does that mean? Now here's the point too. It kind of doesn't matter that it's an accident in some people's conception, because what happens a lot of times in these cases of these two little boys, the boy that accidentally hit the other one, even though it was an accident, he says, hit me back so we're even. He exposes his shoulder, hit me back so we're even. So it doesn't even fucking matter whether it was intentional or an accident in that conception. Now, I think people who have a better conception of revenge, they probably instituted the idea of, well, if it's an accident, don't do it. So go make sure it wasn't an accident. There's extra steps involved. With the two boys that I just said, no one was even trying to figure out whether it's an accident or even if that's even a thing that matters in the issue on how justice should be implemented. Hit me back so we're even.
Well, can I include religion and specifically Islam in this point?
Yeah.
Because there is exactly that kind of situation in connection with ISIS. And there's a verse in the Quran that says, وَيَشْفِ صُدُورَ قَوْمٍ مُؤْمِنِينَ. This is something that's it basically means it satisfies the need for revenge in the hearts of those who believe. So this is something like retribution is not simply a kind of getting back for making sure that there is an eye for an eye, and no, the actual act of revenge is something that is being promoted as a positive thing that needs to be sought.
So it's not just Islam. In America, this happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose there's
it's a human impulsion. It's just something that ended up being codified in the Quranic text and then ended up being part of that.
Right, and it's not just in Islam or a bunch of religions.
Yeah,
it's in the U.S. It's in the U.S. Court system. So the way it happens is somebody commits some murders, and then now there's a court case. And, it takes a while. That there's some media about it now. And the family of the victims
closure.
They want closure, and they say, I want him to pay so that they'll feel better. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the whole society or a portion of the society is supporting that, including of the law. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, so let's go ahead and bring this up then. The first thing people say when they hear my ideas that punishment is evil. Oh, and I want to be clear. I didn't make these ideas. I learned these from other people. That's going to come up in a second here, but let's talk in general for now. The first thing people say when they hear the idea of punishment is evil, they think we're saying no prisons. We're not saying no prisons. Prisons should be for defense, to protect society from further crime. And now, a lot of people don't want that. They want, and you hear this them say this. They say, "I want that guy to get raped in prison." Okay. So now, what that also? Go ahead. You have something to say?
No, I was thinking that it's this impulse to instill revenge is definitely something that brings up this idea of an eye for an eye. If you have someone who committed a crime, it's not enough to go put them in prison. You should actually go ahead and try to do exactly the same thing that they have done, which
and there are prison officers in the U.S. that let that happen by when they see a rape happening, they turn a blind eye. Mm-hmm. Now, in the better prisons, they have a conception that, look, prison is not for revenge or retribution or pain. It is for rehabilitation, for like learning. And there's a recognition of this. If you just watch some movies of prison systems in the US, you'll see movies depicting, even back in the 1950s, I don't know how old, that they have a library in the prison. What the fuck is that for? It's not for retribution, and it's not for entertainment. It's for education, reform.
Well, I'm not quite sure that something like a prison is really a place to aim for rehabilitation in general. It might work for some people, but for the most part,
we can change it and make it better. Like, for one thing, prisoners should have therapy.
Yeah, yes, I agree with that. But saying that it's generally for rehabilitation and that this might be an implicit aim in all prisons, that's probably not true. Even if they declare that this is one of the goals, when you're actually looking at what's happening in the prison,
well, you have conflicting aims, of course. First of all, you have conflicting aims in the ideas themselves, which you can see in how the policies are made. So on the books, you have some ideas and policies that are saying, yes, we want retribution, and some of the policies are, we want reform. But a consistent prison would be one where all of its policies are about reform. Now, here's the point. Even if you had that, you have individuals in your system that don't agree with that, and they're acting on their own.
Yeah.
Let me say here, people who believe in punishment have an underlying set of ideas propping up their belief that punishment is good or a necessary component of justice. They defend punishment by saying that people can't learn without pain. So they think in the prison system there needs to be pain so that they reform. Okay? But I say here, but their conception of how learning works is all wrong. So I guess I'm glad that we did 3 episodes of explaining how learning works. I noticed in none of it did we say there's pain. And here's the point. Learning works by explanations, not pain. And if there is pain, that makes it harder. So if we learn while there's pain, it's despite the pain, not because of it.
There's probably an implicit Christian conception of redemption that happens through pain in this case. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a universal interpretation of what the pain is actually doing or what the punishment. I do think that many people who come from a Christian tradition might actually view it in that way.
I'm guessing it's much older than Christianity. I mean, it's in Judaism, the concept of eye for an eye, and
yeah, but the idea of pain. We're not talking about punishment as such. I mean, you can talk about punishment as just putting someone away. Is that pain? Yeah, in a kind of a generalized way. It's not the same thing as the suffering that you might have.
Well, one is intentional pain, and the other one is incidental pain that we couldn't avoid, because that's what happens when you put someone in jail and they're not in society anymore.
Yeah.
If they don't like that, then that is pain. Yeah. But that wasn't the intention. It's only to protect us.
And I think in general that's actually the whole goal of what got interpreted after that as a punishment for its own sake, because eventually if someone committed some kind of an infraction against society, against individuals in the society, you would like to put them away in order to prevent further damage, and also in a way to create some kind of a deterrence to tell other people, well, you probably need to think twice before you think about committing something of that sort. So deterrence and also keeping order is probably, in my conception, what the original evolution of punishment in the first place.
But what it causes is a scenario where, well, here, let me backtrack. Let me try to argue their side a little bit more. The people that like or believe in the concept of we need pain for learning, what they envision is stuff like, when a kid touches the stove when it's hot, and then, ow, that hurt, and then I'm not doing that anymore. So they make this connection. There had to be pain. If he didn't feel pain, he wouldn't not be doing it. He would keep doing it. That's how they're seeing it. Now, what's weird about when they say stuff like that is they don't have a conception of what all the other learning is like. Like when we're learning physics in physics class, there's no pain there. And I'm sure they agree learning is happening there. So the point is pain isn't necessary. It's not a necessary component.
Yeah. Although when it comes to learning up until relatively recently, in most people, in most regions of the world, you have corporal punishment as part of the educational system for kids mainly, thinking that unless you actually inflict pain in order to make sure that discipline is adhered to, but you can also see it being inflicted on people who have issues with learning. I have personally seen that.
Yeah, you're saying they're having trouble learning, so the teacher thinks, let me hit you and then you'll do better.
Yeah, there's some I mean, it's not out of the question. I'm not saying that this is the rule, but
now what this goes along with is I think I said this during this miniseries, but if not, I know I said it before. I know we talked about it during the June 14th event we had to mark the birth of this organization. We talked about the scientific age, and we talked about how Socrates brought, or at least before Socrates, I don't know how far before, there was an older style of teaching, which of course still exists today, where the idea is, as the teacher, I'm going to tell you what to think, and then on the test, you have to regurgitate what I say, and I'm going to judge, and the society judges the student by how well you parent me. Okay. And then the newer way was, you guys could know things I don't know. So it's not automatically I'm right. You guys could be right. And we have to have a dialogue to figure out who's right. And usually we're both wrong. And some third thing that we figure out during the dialogue is the right thing, or the better of the initial two positions. And the point is, in these two opposing systems, the pain one, the idea that learning happens by pain, would go along with that first conception, which is the teacher's infallible, the student should do whatever the teacher says. Like the teacher can't be wrong in this conception.
And so you can see here that in this type of situation, there's a kind of a connection between avoidance of pain and performing that particular task that the teacher or whoever is an authority is requiring that, which means that the creative part of the learning process is never actually nurtured. You're actually just focusing on achieving that minimum that's going to have you avoid the pain, rather than giving you an incentive to go
so
beyond.
What they're learning mostly is learning how to avoid pain. They're not really learning the topic.
Right. Yeah. They're
not developing an interest in the topic, or developing methods of thinking that help with all sorts of other things.
Their learning is just basically a byproduct of the process that involves the infliction of pain. It's not the learning itself, but rather the learning becomes a byproduct.
So I learned these ideas from a parenting philosophy that I've been following for 14 years. It's called taking children seriously. It doesn't mean taking them away in a serious way. It means to treat them seriously. So this was founded in the mid-1990s by Sarah Fitzclaridge. She had a considerable amount of help from David Deutsch. You can find her on Twitter, and there's a website, takingchildrenseriously.com. Another way, the way she says this, and this is, I think, a lot better way to say it, is the conception is we should be treating children as full human beings who deserve respect as much as adults do. And if anything, they, in a sense, deserve more respect than adults do. If there's going to be like a difference, it should be the kids need stuff more than we do. Okay. I went and found this philosophy right after I left Islam, because I was in search of philosophy. First, I found The Beginning of Infinity, David Deutsch, the book. And because he was involved in TCS, that's how I got into that. And so I've been doing this with my kids. And one of my kids told me that this was the best thing for our relationship. It helped our relationship function really well. And she gave some proof, which I already knew was going to happen in theory before it happened. But she went ahead and told me, which was she's compared and contrasted our relationship to the relationship she sees between her friends and their parents. And what she sees in their relationships is the kids are lying to the parents, and she says she doesn't lie to me. Now, to be clear, I'm sure she lies to me, but not in a special way to one's parent. It's just the standard lying you do for everyone else, you know?
So within that particular system of philosophy, how is conflict usually dealt with?
So there's a method, which I guess I should have put here and I didn't, called common preference finding. Okay, you're finding common preferences. A common preference is a resolution of a conflict. Now, a conflict is two conflicting ideas. Like, let's say you and I are deciding, hey, we should do a live stream like this one. And I have an initial idea, and let's say you have another initial idea that's different, opposing, that's a conflict. And the idea is we would discuss, and by the end of the discussion, and of course, it doesn't have to be one session, and it could go years, or it could go lifetimes beyond one person. The concept is, by the end of the discussion, we've reached a resolution. We've changed our initial positions. Generally, it's a different one than before, because my new conception now factors in what you said, which I didn't know about in my initial position, and your ideas factored in what I said, which didn't exist in your initial position. So our final position is one that factors in both, and we agreed to it. I mean, that's what you and I are doing all the time. We don't start with no conflicts. All of physics is that way. Everything is a damn conflict.
Yeah,
that's how we find anything.
So when it comes then to the idea of punishment in particular, how would you approach that within that philosophy, and how does that actually generalize to society as a whole? And then how does it go into the more abstract aspects that would involve the punishment that people could get in hell, or those ideas that people would be struggling with as they're thinking about leaving religion?
You asked me 5 big questions. Let's see if I remember them all.
Well, they're like nested dolls.
Yeah, they are. So you asked me how I deal with it at home. So, I don't punish them. And look, being mean and making an angry face, that's a type of punishment. If I'm going to try to, and let's get more general now. There's a concept of coercion, which is a legal concept in the US. And it's related to force. If you threaten force on someone and you say, if somebody points a gun at your head and says, do X or I'm going to shoot your brain. Now, he hasn't actually delivered any force yet. But the way we describe it is that is force. And the better term is coercion. You're coercing someone to act in ways against their will. Okay? Mm-hmm. That is the evil. Punishment is a type of that. And back to the common preference finding, the concept is you're trying to avoid coercion, and doing the process, you have to avoid the coercion too. It can't just be like you're imagining, well, by the end, there's going to be no coercion. Therefore, anything that happened in between is okay. That concept of, we've talked about it a few times. A means to an end. If the end goal is non-coercive solution, you can't use this logic of anything that led to that is also okay.
Yeah.
And that means things like, if me as the parent wants to resolve a conflict with my kid and they don't want to talk to me right now, I can't force them. I shouldn't force them. First of all, it's going to ruin it. This concept is basic in therapy. Imagine there was a parent that says to their kid, hey, I think you need therapy, and I'm going to force you to go to therapy. If that parent talked to the therapist would say, fuck no, don't do that. That's going to ruin everything. That goes against all the principles. It has to be willingly, consensual.
So the dynamic that you have between a parent and a child is not the same as in those other situations. So
let me do an example everyone brings up.
Okay.
2-year-old kid, you're in the yard, and the kid is going after a ball that just started going into the street, and they're going to the street, and a car's about to hit them. And I, as the parent, go and grab the child and save them from dying. And people like to say, well, that's force, therefore you're for force. And I say, no, it's not force, because they wanted me to save them. That kid will thank me afterwards. Okay? And you had to act fast. Now, here's the thing. In an extreme case, a baby was just born. This actually has happened plenty of times. There were cases where a baby was fed some formula. They spit it out, but then the parent forced the formula back in, and then the baby died. There was something poisonous in the formula. The parent didn't know. The kid did know, not like in a conscious, explicit way, but they didn't like it. Mm-hmm. And if the parent had respected that preference, that kid would still be alive.
True, though, given the fact that there was no communication of any sort, it's going to be...
There is communication. The kid
Yeah,
went.
yeah, that's true.
You have to read your kids' signals. And this happens with adults too. Like between you and me, it's not just the communication in the words. We're also paying attention to people's moods and faces and all that. There's tons of extra communication happening. And when it's a baby born yesterday, that's the only part that you have access to.
So, is your proposal then to avoid punishment altogether, or to do what might be done as punishment, but to reinterpret this as something else?
Well, that's too vague. My answer would be no, but if you give me a concrete example, I could flesh it out.
Well, like the situation that you just described with saving the child, which might appear as a kind of a violent act, someone would say, well, I'm hitting my child because I'm actually doing that for their own benefits.
To teach
Or,
because of the
or
pain.
yeah, or if we want to go in a little bit more extreme direction, when an infant is circumcised without them giving any kind of consent, without any kind of any communication on the side of the parent with the child to do that, there's inevitably pain, especially if you're doing this in a ritualistic way. But the parent would say, especially if it's a religious thing, that this is being done for the benefit of the child. This is something to...
It's coercion. That's it. The kid didn't want it.
Well, still, it's a kind of a pain that's being inflicted in order to give them some kind of a benefit in the long run that they did not see in the immediate time when the pain was being inflicted.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that one. I mean, both of us are against that anyway.
Yeah, I'm definitely against it. I'm definitely against it.
Well, the formula case is easier because we're both for the idea of, well, I mean, I think first, okay, between mother's milk and formula, definitely go with the milk. Formula and industrial made bullshit, fuck that. Maybe 1,000 years from now, but not today. But if you don't have mother's milk, then definitely formula. Since that's the only alternative in that scenario. And we both agreeing with that concept, right? And then the idea is, do you force it on the kid? And I'm saying no, because I give an example where the kid does know. The kid does know that there's something wrong with it.
And I'm sure that the parent would likely instinctively also have an inkling that something is happening that's wrong, because when something like that happens in nature, a parent of another species is not going to start forcing their infants or offspring to do something that they don't want. But at the same time, we also need to look at the parent, because the parent is probably going to have their own issues going on. And so suppose that the child is crying, the parent has some external stressor. Why is the child not responding to me? I'm going to be force feeding the child in order to get on with it so that I can deal with other problems. So the communication is not as clear cut as it might be.
I want to do two more examples because they always come up. Okay, and let me say them real quick so we can remember, and then I'll talk about each of them. One example is giving a child a vaccine, and the other one is you have two kids and one's beating up the other one. Okay, in the first case, what you see if you watch videos in this, you have some people that have no care at all for the child, and they just go in quick and do it, even though the child is scared, and then they're done. But then you have some people who are trying to get the kid to be okay with it, put them in a good mood first, maybe put some local anesthetic, and then you sometimes have scenarios where the kid wasn't against it. They weren't crying. And by the way, it's a separate issue of, probably should have prefaced this, I'm not saying automatically all vaccines are good. There's a separate issue of maybe there's some vaccines that are bad. But I'm talking about the basic concept of giving medicine to kids. Sometimes they don't like it, but you have to make it easier so that it's okay.
Right. It's deconflating pain from punishment. Not every pain is necessarily a form of punishment, but many punishments are going to involve some form of pain, whether it's physical or mental or something of the sort.
So here's the other one now. One of your kids is beating up the other kid. Now, first I'm going to explain what not to do and what happens, and then what to do. So, you remove you can't just go and say, hey, first kids, don't do that, and then never do anything. You say stop, yes, but then you have to escalate more if they didn't stop. You physically remove them. Now, is that coercive? Yes, but it was already a coercive situation, and you're trying to make it not coercive. So similarly, if one country invaded another country with war, a defensive war to stop them is what's going to bring peace back. Now, I know Britain did, India did something different, a peaceful means of getting rid of the British. And that's amazing. But that's not always possible. Like that, probably the British in that scenario were like the nicest dictators there ever was, which is why they were able to do it in a peaceful way. If they were worse, that would have been a violent method of revolution. And now the bad way, imagine your two kids are fighting, and then you remove the one kid, and then you say, hey, this person needs pain now, so he learns a lesson. Now let me hit you to teach you don't hit people. That's fucking retarded. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's that parent probably needs re-education themselves. They have to get into the actual mindset of parenting, because they're acting like a child.
And they're not, no, it's worse. I don't think really children's work like that. I think in a lot of ways children are better than adults, because the adults were indoctrinated and the children weren't yet. So let's see. I want to talk about shame real quick. You're asking me how this manifests in how I treat my kids. So one thing I recognized really early on is I don't want to instill shame in my kids. So an example type thing. Now I have 2 daughters, and we haven't had the mother in our lives for a long time. So imagine a father and 2 daughters and no mother. So I felt like I have to be the mother also. So when my kids, got to the age of puberty, and now they have all sorts of problems that I don't know shit about, but also, when, like, I have to make it where it's easy for them to talk to me about it. And by the way, I didn't really know how to do that, besides to try to talk about it without having visceral reactions of whatever. Yeah. There was one time where my daughter was trying to talk to me about something related to her vagina, and I got a visceral reaction, and it was something like that. And then I was there frozen for a second, and then she goes, "Do you want me to stop talking about this?" And I said, related to that, it's the same theme here we're talking about. I guess I got to tell a little bit of a story to really drive the point of this shame thing. For the longest time after the divorce with their mother, my parents are talking to me, you got to get married again. And part of why they're saying it is also one thing for me, but another part of it is they're seeing it as a replacement mother to the kids. And I hated that whole idea. But anyway, years of that kind of talking. And one day I go to my daughter and I say, so, like, do you think I should get married? And she said, why? And I said, and then I was trying to remember what the fuck my parents said. I was like, so you can have a mother. And then she goes, what for? I'm like, I said, to talk to you about your vagina problems. And she said, but we talk to you about that. Generally, that doesn't happen. Generally, and I mean in our current culture in America and everywhere, the kids, especially girls, let's say, are instilled with some shame about their sexual parts. And boys have it too, but I think girls even more. I think even more so girls with their father versus their mother. Although, I mean, that could go either way. Some mothers are very shame instilling related to that stuff too. You know, like if anyone mentions anything that's sexual, oh my God, don't talk about that, or with the angry face, you know? I never did that. Or if I did, I was really trying not to. That's my point. I'm not perfect. And, you know, I'm coming from the old, I was indoctrinated for, 30 some years before I had the kids. So, I want to say here, by the way, I don't think we finished. Oh, we didn't really. Okay, here's where we can connect to the broader stuff.
Well, maybe we can back up a little bit, because you mentioned the context of shame in a very specific way. That's not a very broad thing that can connect to shame in some way that's more abstract, that says that there is a kind of a connection between the idea of punishment and shame in a way that might be clear for people who are listening.
Connected better. So, I mean, shame, we've talked about this before in some of the earlier episodes, but shame is, and the way you described it is, it's the collective trying to get you to like adopt certain ideas, but it's really not the ideas, it's the feelings. Hey, we see this as bad, and so you should feel bad for the idea of even trying to go against it. You know, like
a way to ensure that your sense of belonging to the community is emphasized, is ensured by having a way to punish people psychologically if they try to.
And then it becomes self-imposed because you internalize it.
Yeah.
And I think people recognize this. As adults, young adults, you have these sayings in your head that come about, and they are what your parents said. Yeah. Even if they're dead, they're talking to you.
Yes.
And that's part of what this program is about, is to de-indoctrinate from that stuff. And I've said it already in multiple times, but this is deeper than religion. The ideas people have about punishment is deeper than religion. Even when they get rid of their religion, they didn't get rid of these ideas about punishment, which is why they still fear hell.
Yeah,
and they still feel like a sinner, and it's why they still want cosmic justice.
Yeah, and so it's actually worth emphasizing that religion never actually invented any of this stuff, including the claims that you get so many people saying religion was the only system that invented ethics, and those are the ethics that still prevail in our society, and so on. Punishment wasn't invented by religion. Religion is just a system that ended up regulating some of these things and using it for other purposes that have nothing to do with the general human needs and phenomena that are associated with them.
So this is probably a good segue now. So you asked also, how does this connect with the broader theme of everything related to religion? And so this is part of a nonprofit to rid the world of apostasy laws. Apostasy laws are a punishment, one of the worst forms of a punishment. So we started this nonprofit, Uniting the Cults, whose purpose is, well, I guess what I just said. And the vision is a world where people recognize love as the goal and rationality as the method to achieve it. Now, punishment is against love, and it's also against rationality. It breaks what we know about learning. It does not follow the concepts of learning. It debilitates learning, and it is hateful. It is against love.
So what does that mean in the broader society when it comes to trying to replace something like punishments, if that's actually something that's possible in the current society? What sort of
it's conflict resolution. I mean, that's what punishments were for, is how to deal with conflicts, disagreements more generally, how to deal with a disagreement between two human beings. And in the concept of punishment, One side is saying, well, I'm infallible. I know more than you. It's going to go my way, and I'm going to deliver a punishment, so you go my way. And if the other guy says the same thing, which that happens between countries, okay? They're doing that now. I think that's what's happening between Israel and Palestine. Not all factions. I think there's people on both sides that understand love and they don't want revenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably I forgot the actual point that I was going to make about the punishment point. I'll get back to it once I remember it.
Okay. And so I started a podcast for this nonprofit to help with the goal of ridding the world of apostasy laws, and it's mainly about education, to educate the world and also to be educated with experts. And a big part of the podcast is to do with what I see as the main obstacle to reaching the goal of this nonprofit. And I see that as something to do with, or many things to do with, truth seeking and propaganda. Or in the words we said during our June 14th birth of this nonprofit, we're in the scientific age, but we do not think scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
Truth seeking and propaganda. Propaganda is not scientific thinking. It debilitates any kind of scientific thinking. And then we do a live stream. That's what this is, called Deconstructing Islam, with you, Dr. Usama al-Binni, theoretical physicist, and you run, or you help run the Arab Atheist Magazine and the Arab Atheist Broadcasting Project.
Yes.
And what we're doing with this live stream, more generally than just this mini series, is helping people that are struggling with Islam and also helping the outside world better understand us.
Okay, let me go back then to the point of apostasy that I was going to make. When it comes to having two sides that are willing to talk about a conflict, that there is some kind of a willingness to actually do that, that's definitely going to lead maybe to reduce the intensity of the conflict, maybe eventually resolve it. The problem here is that when you're looking at this from the perspective of the society as a whole, that condemns apostasy as a crime and tries to punish it, they don't view this as a kind of fight between equals or a conflict between equals, so that they don't actually...
It's God against us.
Yeah, so coming to a common ground for understanding, to actually say, okay, let's debate this, let's try to resolve this in a way that's going to be good for the benefit of everybody. That's something that's really hard to come to. And the closest thing that comes to mind is when you see, for example, Muslims, some of them would say to you, be an atheist if you want, leave religion if you want, just keep it to yourself. It's not your right to say that in public, to say it out loud. You're hurting other people. You're affecting the stability of the society by criticizing religion or by saying things that would disturb the tranquility of others. That's probably the most I have seen that they were giving the other side. So it's a really big gap that exists between the two, that prevents them from reaching even a place where it's possible to talk. I'm sure that there are many Muslims, many believers in general, that are willing to take a step, and I have seen some people do that, take a step forward and try to understand the other side, speak in a very civil, polite.
People's perceptions of punishment, even if they don't reach the level of punishment is evil, they do reduce the severity of the punishments. So like in the US, punishment is still allowed, and actually even hitting your child is allowed, in most states. But what is allowed in severity of those beatings has been going down over time.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't reach the level of all punishment is wrong.
Yeah. And I would also find parallels in what's happening in Muslim majority societies, where you can see that there are certain things that are being phased out for various reasons, like certain severe punishments, amputations, for example. This is not something that gets implemented except in very specific societies where you see that there is an adherence to an ideology that's a little bit extreme, but you still see that.
So you just reminded me somehow of the other way that people argue for punishment, which is to teach everyone else a lesson.
Yeah, at the turns.
Which is the same as the concept of revenge. The way they say it, if you ask people that believe in revenge, if you ask them like why, what they say is stuff like, and I've had regular people explain this, not philosophical people that know anything about the philosophy of any of this on either side. They want to do the punishment so everyone else knows, don't fuck with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
that's actually, once again, it goes back to the basis of why these punishments originated in human societies in the first place. Because if there's someone who committed some kind of an infraction, you want to make sure that the standard for the entire society deals with these cases before this becomes I wouldn't say a norm, because I'm sure that in a stable society you don't see everyone just thinking about stealing, but you would see it as something that becomes more prevalent in case you don't have
but again, theft, you should go to jail. That's my position. And by the way, we have this problem in the US. There's many big cities in the US, they call them soft on crime, where it's only a misdemeanor, where you only get fined for theft and you don't go to jail. And theft is run away. Like, not only is it happening a lot, the people that are stealing, because they have so many chances to do it, are getting better at it. They're getting really well trained. Where if they went to jail instead, they're just in jail not learning how to steal more.
Possibly. I'm not sure if jail would actually resolve the issue, but it's probably going to be something much more complicated than just using jail as a kind of.
That's why I say things like there needs to be therapy, like there needs to be a psychological understanding of the whole prison concept. There should be therapists.
Yeah, but going back to the idea of punishment and how it fits into the religious conception of someone who is trying to leave the religion. Most religions have some form of a punishment of some sort, whether it's going to be psychological or even physical, like in the case of apostasy laws. But the idea of punishment is definitely something that figures a lot in the mindset of someone who's leaving a religion. I for one, I had a very hard time for many years getting rid of the idea of hell, having it completely disappear from my mind. Even though I had, from a rational point of view, reached a place where I'm comfortable that what I believe, what I have found so far in terms of my positions relative to religion, they're stable. And yet you have this psychological fear that's not easy to get rid of, because this is something that I have been indoctrinated in growing up for many years, seeing it in so many different contexts. Everybody thinks that, yes, if you do that, you're going to go to hell. If you don't do that, you're also going to go to hell. So you have to be behaving in a very specific way. And so doing something that might be different is definitely going to be acting on you psychologically, internally, without even needing that external
Yeah, it's
motivation.
very hard to shed shame from you when it was
Yeah,
already indoctrinated in you for years.
yeah, yeah.
You know, it's no different than if you were building a habit for 10 years, you can't switch that habit to a better one in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
You know, and the way I've heard it from a therapist, if you were in a shitty marriage for 20 years, and I mean shitty like where one person was very abusive to the other one, it might you need about half that time to shed it from you, and that's if you were doing well in therapy the whole time.
yeah.
I don't know if I agree with those numbers necessarily. Maybe that's like an average, but it's a good way to conceive of it. You know,
Right. And so in general, the process of recovery from religion is like recovery from a kind of
a bad abusive relationship with your husband, yes,
yeah,
or wife,
it's something that does leave very deep scars that are not going
and
to
maybe
be.
deeper than
Yeah,
any issue with because the fear of hell thing and the whole religion, that's something you got really early on in your life. When you have an abusive relationship with your spouse, that started in your adulthood. It's not as indoctrinated into you
mhm.
as much.